Welcome to Justice Matters. I am Denise George, Attorney General of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Justice Matters is a program aimed to inform, engage, and empower you with knowledge of Virgin Islands laws and legal issues that affect our everyday lives and our community, including insightful discussions with special guests so you can be empowered to make a difference. Today's topic is separate and unequal. It's about federal Supplemental Security Income, or also called SSI. For those of you who are not familiar with SSI, it's about the largest federal cash assistance program in the United States that provides monthly income assistance to adults and children who are disabled, blind, or elderly and have minimal or no income and few assets. SSI is an essential lifeline for the nation's most vulnerable populations. These benefits, however, are not provided to U.S. citizens living in the Virgin Islands or other unincorporated territories just because of where we live. This unequal and discriminatory denial of these disability benefits to our most vulnerable disabled citizens just because they do not reside in the states is why the Office of the Attorney General, on behalf of the government of the Virgin Islands, filed an amicus brief with the United States Supreme Court in U.S. versus Vallejo Madero, requesting the court to strike down discrimination by the United States against residents of the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and other territories in supplemental security income benefits. This case is still pending before the U.S. Supreme Court, and the court's decision will have a significant impact on the residents of the Virgin Islands, particularly those most vulnerable, the disabled and disadvantaged children and adults. The Madero case is originated in Puerto Rico, wherein Mr. Vallejo Madero, a disabled U.S. citizen and born in Puerto Rico, had been living in New York State and receiving SSI benefits. When he later moved back to Puerto Rico, he was denied these benefits solely because he changed his residence from New York to Puerto Rico, where, as in the Virgin Islands and other unincorporated territories, citizens are not entitled to these federal benefits. Generally, the inhabitants of the Virgin Islands and other territories who are U.S. citizens do not automatically get all of the same fundamental rights or treatment as do residents of the 50 states. Our land is not an independent sovereign, and the only powers that we receive are derived not from the U.S. Constitution, but from acts of Congress, such as the Revised Organic Act. Of course, you may be wondering what led to such a separate and unequal policy. How did we get to this place where residents of the Virgin Islands and other so-called unincorporated territories are not afforded the same rights as the inhabitants of the 50 states? The fact is, this type of treatment is historically connected to our status as an unincorporated territory and established before the Virgin Islands was even acquired from Denmark in 1917. Let me give you a brief history. When the United States was founded and the U.S. Constitution ratified, there only existed 13 states. However, it was understood that more territory would be acquired by the newly formed nation. This led to the Territorial Clause and the continuation of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which paved the way for all new territories to inevitably become states. In other words, under this model, new territories would be welcomed and incorporated into the Union as states, with its inhabitants being granted the same rights and privileges equal to those living in all other states. This remained the case for much of the 19th century, that is, until the conclusion of the Spanish-American War of 1898, when the U.S. acquired Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Guam, and Cuba. These newly acquired territories suddenly were not offered a clear path to statehood. Because of the perceived racial and cultural differences between them, mainland Americans perceived residents of the new island territories as others. The Treaty of Paris, which concluded the war, left the determination of the civil rights and political rights of the native inhabitants of these territories to Congress. This meant that the peoples of these territories were not to enter into and form a part of the American family and were promised no civil or political rights under U.S. rule. This was followed by a series of U.S. Supreme Court opinions known as the Insular Cases, which occurred in the early 1900s. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the inhabitants of these newly acquired territories under American control, even if they are U.S. citizens, may rightfully be deprived of some civil and constitutional rights afforded citizens and residents of the states. The court made it unapologetically obvious that the race and culture of the inhabitants of those new territories was a primary factor in that determination. For instance, Justice Brown, in the case Downs v. Bidwell, reportedly said that these people of different races, inhabitants, laws, and customs may threaten white Anglo-Saxon domination. He claimed that there would be extremely serious consequences if the offspring of the colony's inhabitants, whether savages or civilized, would become entitled to all the rights, privileges, and immunities of citizens. The court ruled that Congress has wide-ranging political power over these possessions inhabited by quote-unquote alien races differing from us in religion, customs, laws, and methods of taxation and modes of thought. These cases, the Insular Cases, are what resulted in the new designation called unincorporated territories, to which constitutional rights need not apply, as opposed to the incorporated territories that are on the path to statehood, separate and unequal. This was the hostile climate that the USVI found itself in 1917 when the United States purchased the Danish West Indies from Denmark as the unincorporated territory we remain today. The Insular Cases have never been overturned, so they essentially remain what we lawyers called good law. The consequences are self-evident and still operate to govern the U.S. Virgin Islands and other unincorporated territories. The U.S. Supreme Court continues to hold that Congress may provide fewer benefits to residents of the unincorporated territories so long as there is a rational basis for its actions. But how can there be a rational or reasonable basis for the denial of fundamental rights of disability benefits, such as SSI, when Virgin Islanders have not only served, fought, and died defending the United States in war, paid taxes, and have been invaluable contributors to the advancement of this nation? That is why the government of the Virgin Islands filed an amicus brief in support of Mr. Madero in the U.S. v. Madero case. The time is now for the Supreme Court of the United States to right the wrongs committed in the past. That brings us to my special guest today, attorney Archie Jennings, who for many years has been a legal activist for the disabled through the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands, which provides legal advocacy for our disabled population, and also filed an amicus brief in the Madero case. Welcome to Justice Matters, attorney Jennings.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I appreciate your invitation.
Oh, well, this is a very important topic, and I'm glad to have you here. And I want you to tell us more about what is the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands.
Okay. The Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands is an agency funded by the federal government called a Protection and Advocacy Agency. And essentially, we provide services, legal services, to persons with physical and or mental disabilities. We offer services such as information referral, short-term assistance, technical assistance, because we also cover the American with Disabilities Act, as well as some court relief when there's systemic issues. Mm-hmm. So we, small agency, so we get what's called a minimal federal allotment in order to operate. And our main office is on St. Croix, next to Kmart on Center Line Road. And then we have a satellite office here in St. Thomas at Havenside.
What role do you play?
I am the managing attorney on the
Mhm.
St. Thomas office and advocacy director. The executive director just recently retired is Amelia Hadley Lamont, and we now have Angus Drygo as a new executive director. There's a board of persons in the Virgin Islands who serve in capacity, and they require a legal expertise, someone with medical background, persons with disabilities, or parents of persons with disabilities, or other relatives. So we try to have a mixed board of professionals and persons who are directly affected here in the Virgin Islands because of their disability.
And so the purpose then, is there a mission, a specific mission of the
Yes, the
organization?
mission of basically the entire network is to allow, to advocate for persons with disability to become fully integrated in society as far as financial income, medical relief, and any other aspect of society that excludes them, wanted to be totally inclusive in their lives in the Virgin Islands and in the United States.
Okay, so now you said you're funded by partially federal funding.
Correct.
And you're nonprofit.
Yes.
It is a nonprofit organization. So these services are provided to the clients, to the disabled, free of charge to them.
Correctly.
So that entails also sometimes the court system. Then, I mean, if you have a legal, advocacy, so you also handle matters in court.
Over the years, we unfortunately have sued the government of the Virgin Islands for mental health, as well as Vitran for the paratransit buses. That was back in 2000, and they got buses 2005 and 2014 with some assistance from the Department of Justice. We've also partnered now with the ACLU case for the prison case, as well as issues regarding health care in the prison at one point in time.
So how does a person get in touch with you, a disabled person who would qualify?
Right.
How do they get in touch with the disability rights?
Well, we have two sources. One is the basic webpage. We have drcvi.org, or the telephone at 772-1200.
And I know that that there was even a study recently done, Shadow Citizens.
Yes.
And and I want to talk about that because it's the topic of the show, deals with
right.
SSI separate but unequal treatment with respect to the SSI. But first, tell me, what about the Shadow Citizen? What was that publication?
Well, basically, Shadow Citizen is that in name, persons in the Virgin Islands are citizens of the United States, but not given the full light of day of the law. There's the issue regarding not able to vote for president. There's the issue of certain programs such as SSI and I think it's Old Age and Disability and the Blind Act, don't give the same amount of funding to the Virgin Islands as they would another state.
Right.
So Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa are all treated treated differently than a state, even though the Virgin Islands pays more tax dollars into the federal coffers than other states.
And that is a very good point, because a lot of times when we say, oh, well, we don't get the same amount of federal benefits, the first thing people shoot back with is, oh, yeah, but we don't pay federal tax. But we, in fact, do pay a lot of taxes.
Yeah, they always get it mixed up. We don't pay income tax.
Income, right.
But there's other federal taxes that, as I was noting before we got in the study, that Puerto Rico is first. They pay $3,528,000 into the federal coffers. Virgin Islands comes second. We pay $179 million into the federal coffers. And then there's Guam and the Commonwealth of the Mariana Islands coming third and fourth. Some of those taxes are, to me, are paid more than the state of Mississippi or some other smaller states pay into the federal coffers. And that was the excuse given for years. It took a principal investigator to really put in the Freedom of Information request and sort out what are exactly the federal dollars paid in by the Virgin Islands through various taxes, such as the run cover over taxes that the U.S. collects. And that's what these numbers sort of represent, is that we pay our fair share. But even with that, I think for years you had ARP through Donna Christensen being a delegate, and Cora Christian also being with ARP, and Denise Singleton, and even Troy Schuster, who's there now. I was sitting on their executive committee and would interact with the other ARP members from different states. And they would say the same thing. I said, oh, being the private attorney, I said, well, what is the cost of a life? Someone who lives or dies. You have veterans who have been in every war since World War II, coming from the Virgin Islands, giving their life. And that sort of triggered a response that they stopped saying these things. And essentially, even with this latest lawsuit that we filed an amicus on, like you have.
This is on the Madera case.
In the Madera case, ARP also filed an amicus.
Okay.
So it's been sort of like planting seeds for years. You know, ARP and other national organizations have been giving information to sort of downplay this negative image that VI doesn't carry their weight, but they do. And you have to point it out to them before it breaks those barriers down. But essentially, with the Madera case, that's opened the door to see if we can get the justices to move. Since Congress, you know, there's been, I think I pointed out here in the report, 1972, 1978, and 1980s, where Congress had proposed various amendments to fix this disparity.
Oh, really? And what happened?
The Senate knocked it down.
Oh, okay. Because really, you know, as I discussed earlier, the thing is that Congress determines what rights we get as an unincorporated territory. Okay, that's a whole other issue. So they determined that we cannot get rights, let's say particularly Virgin Islands or the other unincorporated territories, as far as the SSI benefits. But you know, the Supreme Court has ruled that Congress can do that as long as it has a rational basis. But how rational could it be when we talk about what we talk? The taxes are being paid. All the people are fighting in the wars, and you know
that have been knocked down, and that's true. And essentially, what needs to be done, even after Madero, is to keep up the information, give the Congress data. That's one of the things on the medical side. We really have to pick up and close that gap on medical data in order to surround them, knock down every argument that's being brought up, and address it correctly. And
was that a help with the shadow citizens?
The principal investigator did the issue and came up with the information on the taxes, which is dollars and cents sort of sways some judges, maybe not others.
What would you say is the impact on the Virgin Islands of not being able to have, or the citizens or the residents not being able to have the benefit of SSI?
It's tremendous, because essentially one of the things about SSI, which I only know because I have friends who are social workers in other states and I've worked at, SSI helps with the homeless situation. Because once these programs started called group homes, now I have a friend who has probably oversees 2 or 3 group homes. Those gentlemen or persons in the group home help pay rent through their SSI. They're covered for the medicals. If they need meds, they're covered by Medicare or Medicaid. Therefore, they're not on the street, especially in the wintertime. And therefore, they are paying into the system, the medical system, because they're bringing in federal dollars to support that system. One of the things I found out when I got to the Virgin Islands, it was that at that time, Roy Lester Snyder Hospital had just been finished, 1982. And it was built with what's called Hill-Burton funds. That was sort of my other project when I was in Ohio, was to bring what was called Hill-Burton cases, which mandates that the hospital give free or below care costs to patients who can't afford to pay. So essentially what happened was that it was implemented. I mean, the hospital was here, and we had a flurry of individuals coming in because they got billed by the hospital. And we responded, well, there's the Hilbert Act, you got to settle with these folks.
Right.
But it would have been better off if they make sure that some of the people who were blind or disabled, if they could make sure they had those programs in place here, it would have supported the hospital, both hospitals, over a number of years. Because one of the things that you always saw was unfunded liability by the hospital.
Right, exactly.
Those were missing federal dollars.
Right.
Those were missing federal dollars.
And I would the say SSI covers for all of those kids, particularly.
SSI in combination with Medicare,
Medicaid and Medicare, right,
would pay for those missing dollars. And the same thing with the nursing home. Because of lack of available SSI funding, they missed some federal dollars there, and just the continual fight over Medicaid dollars flowing to the Virgin Islands. We were treated different. When I first came in the 1980s, there was a cap of like $5 million available for Medicaid. Well, there's no cap in the States. You have a percentage, 55 or, I think California was paying something like 20 cents on the dollar, and the federal government was
So
paying
it's not just SSI, there's also disparity and inequality in Medicaid treatment as well.
Right. And those lack of dollars really undercut the Virgin Islands healthcare system, because the cost of medical were going up, and up, and the Virgin Islands had no cover. Because usually at some point, even though the cost went up, the feds would put in more to cover the basic income.
And we have right now we have over 32,000 people on Medicaid. And that's the program we have.
Right.
So what do you think, with respect to the Madera case? Of course, it's still pending. What would a favorable decision do you think, for the Virgin Islands?
The favorable decision would be if we're to be treated equally on par with the states. That's what Hope Springs Eternal, that the judge will come down with. Then they'll recalculate the Medicare, make sure that there's no cap on it. And we won't be facing this Medicaid cliff that we keeps getting pushed back with the federal budget. That they will implement SSI for those who are not having any guaranteed income other than the, what's they call cash assistance is only what they give right now. And that the persons would also be eligible for, mainly it's a lot of children with disability, will be available for Medicare as well as Medicaid eligibility, and their parents won't have to relocate to get them the medical care off island. And that's another issue, and it may generate more services here in the Virgin Islands. So therefore, a lot of people, I have to admit, I did it too, had to go off island because I couldn't get a prosthesis here to get some surgery. But it
should help with all of that. It would have that result.
Yes,
that's good.
Because it's essential that you circulate your dollars here, because it's anything otherwise, the dollars come and they go, and therefore you can't cover technicians, you can't cover the nurses. A lot of the dollars and what's missing are not helping those who support the healthcare system.
Right.
So they're sort of locked into what's available here and the funding that's available here.
Okay, great. That's a great point. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Justice Matters. Remember the contact information for the Disability Rights Center. On St. Croix, 340-772-1200, and on St. Thomas, 340-776-4303. And the website is drcvi.org. I do hope that the U.S. Supreme Court decision would turn out to be a victory for Mr. Madero, which would be a victory for all of us. And I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of Justice Matters.